Welcome to Zero Waste Asia Newsroom. I'm Sonia Astudillo, GAIA Global Climate Communication Officer, coming to you from our newsroom as we cover the second day of INC-5 negotiations for the Global Plastics Treaty in Busan, South Korea. Joining us live from Busan is Arpita Bhagat, GAIA Asia Pacific's Plastic Policy Officer. Hi, Arpita. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us. Let's jump straight into the latest there in INC-5. So, Arpita, what are the key trends and developments emerging at INC-5 so far, particularly in terms of its organization and structure?
Yeah, so the last we spoke was yesterday at 5 p.m. and it's now 6 p.m. in Korea on 26th. And we somehow managed to conclude the plenary, which no one was expecting, and get into contact groups around 7:30 local time here. And then the contact groups went till about 11:30, if I'm not wrong. And essentially just a recap on contact groups, they are the informal spaces where discussion on substantial provisions of the instrument are had. And this time there are 4 contact groups that the chair has proposed. Contact group 1 looks at plastic products and chemicals of concern, exemptions, plastic product design, and then supply and definitions. It's a slightly strange way of structuring because it doesn't start with production. It actually ends with supply. Production cuts now falls in supply. And this is on the basis of the chair's non-paper 3 that we spoke about briefly yesterday as well. CG2, contact group 2 looks at emissions and release, plastic waste management, existing plastic pollution, which encompasses also trade. There is no dedicated provision on trade, unfortunately. And just transition, contact group 3 on finance, capacity building, technical assistance, essentially means of implementation. And contact group 4 is the longest list. It starts with objective, scope, preamble, principles, implementation and compliance, national plans, reporting, effectiveness, and all of those things which are key to seeing how effective this treaty would be, including health, awareness, and research. So it's a slightly different way of structuring. And yesterday, CG1, I'm sorry, not CG1, CG2 and CG4 started their discussions that went into the night. Basically, a first reading of non-paper was done, and the countries were invited to make their additions, make their recommendations on how they feel about the text. So they also suggested bracketing of text. Some suggested new textual proposals as well. And essentially, it has been a very strange deja vu kind of feeling for me, and I think so many of us here, because Sonia, you would remember we have gone through all this. We have gone through this process of adding text and bracketing text and then having textual deletions. So a lot of us are fearing that we will end up with the same compilation type of text, which is 670 pages, because as I speak, the non-paper is growing as well. At the same time, non-paper itself was never a good starting point. I mean, it was okay. A lot of countries finally agreed to use it as a starting point because it was shorter and manageable. But in terms of language, it has all the weak language imaginable. So that's what's been going on. And this morning and till this evening, we've also been in contact group 2 and 4. And right now, the expectation is that both contact groups would close at some point, and 7:30 onwards, there would be contact group 1 and 3, 1 being on, supply chemicals and products, which is very important, and 3 being on finance and other means of implementation. So actually, the 2 more important, more critical, I would say, not more important contact groups would go into discussion in about an hour and a half or so.
Arpita, there have been reports of limited space for observers in contact groups. Now, this is the first time. How is this affecting civil society participation, and what challenges does it create?
Yeah, I mean, I really, none of us were expecting this until plenary, which was big. And I have talked about this. Bexco is a massive, massive exhibition space. It has different units, it has different number of floors. And yet we are in a similar position as we were at INC-4, where I mean, actually, it's worse than INC-4 because last night there were two rooms where these discussions were being had, and we were told much later. When we tried to get into the rooms, it seemed like there is hardly enough space to accommodate all the member states. And so we had to kind of give up our seats. A lot of people were sitting on the floor. A lot of people were just standing at the door. A lot of people were standing inside the hall. And eventually the chairs were kind of pushed into the rooms. And there was a lot of white space in the middle of the room, which is strange because you could have utilized it if you structured the rooms better. And ultimately, they had to close the room for observers completely, and there were barely, I think, maybe 4 or 5 of us who managed to sit in, and there was a lot of people sitting outside. A lot of member states also left the negotiations because of this, because eventually it gets suffocating. And later in the night, I think there was an announcement about 60 odd observers allowed in each of the rooms. Yesterday, the discussions were in the same rooms, in the same situation in both the contact groups. Today, the contact group 4 was moved upstairs to a much bigger hall, which accommodates most people. But of course, we are in the same situation as Canada, where we don't have charging points, where we don't have desks. We are sitting with laptops on our lap and trying to manage, but it's still better than yesterday. Meanwhile, contact group 2 is pretty much inaccessible. People are literally locked in, and if you go out, you lose your seat. And so it's a very bad situation. You're basically sitting inside, and you can't go out to get water, food, or for a bathroom break either. And it feels pretty hostile and not at all comfortable because the rooms have been bolted shut. And yeah, so I have not been able to sit inside contact group 2 at all. And this is actually not the situation we imagined. And this is deeply concerning, not just for member states. They also requested to have one member state sitting with the mic and one additional accommodating the member state delegate. And so there is limitation for both. But the secretariat knew that about almost 4,000 people have registered to attend this INC. It's the last INC. It was expected that there will be large number of delegates coming here. And this consideration of space and sitting and, water, food, all of those access should have thought through much earlier. And what we have seen, because people tried to approach the UNEP, people tried to approach the observer coordinator, who was himself pretty stressed with the situation without any resolution. And essentially, we are in a situation where the secretariat is blaming the host country, and the host country is sending it back on the secretariat. So it's a strange situation. Moreover, we also have the situation where the exhibitions and the events that the government invited, that the government have endorsed, that the Republic of Korea set up their rethinking plastic exhibit and area for events. That area is really far away to walk. It's in the adjoining Bexco corner, but it is quite a walk. So that really discourages participation, that discourages member states to be present. It also means that some of our members who are doing the exhibitions. There's a reuse exhibition. There's an exhibition by Asia Reuse Consortium, by Plastic Bag Diet, by Break Free from Plastic, the photo exhibit by Healthcare Without Harm, and many other members and allies have their exhibits, but the participation is quite bad. Right now, as I speak to you, there is a Just Transition event happening. Also, in the other building, which I'm not able to attend because if I go there, I can't catch food before the contact groups resume, and you have to hurry to catch food because getting into contact group 2 is like a lucky thing if you do. And we'll have a similar situation for one of the contact groups tonight. So people would really have to get to outside the room at least 30 minutes ahead of time in order to be able to get in. So the queues are lined up outside and people are just not being allowed in. And this was really not what we expected would happen at INC-4. And so lastly, a letter just to remind everyone, an email has gone to the Secretariat from the Treaty Coalition just in the last 1 hour or so. The Uproot Plastics Coalition has also sent a message to the government. Uproot Plastics is the coalition of civil society groups in Korea who have come together around the plastics treaty negotiations for a strong treaty. And we'll have to just wait and see, but so far it's not optimistic in terms of access for civil society right holders and frontline communities.
Thanks, Arpita. So at INC-4, we didn't have this time, no chairs even. So yes, but I hope things will get resolved now. So let's talk about the non-paper. Can you share any reflections on the non-paper discussed so far, and how is it being received by civil society organization like GAIA? And how is it different from the zero draft? Last time, zero draft started with a few pages and then it got bigger, and now we're saying that the non-paper is not even as good as the zero draft, and then it's getting bigger again. So please tell us more.
The non-paper is definitely not as good. I mean, it's not even 10% as strong as the zero draft, because zero draft had included all options for a provision from the most ambitious to the least ambitious. So in that sense, it reflected the position of all member states and also had consideration of civil society submissions. Like I said yesterday, non-paper has been developed by a few bunch of head of delegations from some countries, while others have felt left out, which is why there was this whole back and forth around whether non-paper would be accepted for basis as a basis of negotiations or not. So that is one point to consider. It does not have the view of all member states. Revised zero draft, which we arrived at last by the end of last INC, has a lot of brackets, over 3,000 brackets, but it was still comprehensive in the sense that it had views of member states. It was difficult to work with that. I don't think the secretariat or the chair could figure out how to work around that. And so non-paper was kind of approached as an easier way out. But non-paper, one, does not reflect all members' views. It excluded rights holders and civil society and grassroots groups. It has a lot of non-binding voluntary language. It has very weak language. Reuse, refill has all fallen into plastic product design provision, and the language is pretty weak. Primary plastic production is completely gone. It's been replaced with supply, which is supposed to encompass it. But again, there's no discussion about what supply means, which is what a lot of member states are saying. No text had been proposed by the chair on scope and principles and preamble. And today in CG4, we see those discussions happening. So now again, we have some awful suggestions on what scope needs to be, offer suggestion on what objective needs to be, while the chair had three possible objectives. And so it's quite strange. The non-paper has more in-depth articles on implementation, like looking at national plans, looking at compliance, effectiveness, reporting. And it has borrowed a lot of language from Minamata that's presumed. But it has very little text on the main core obligations. And whatever is there is a lot of language around nationally determined capacities and capabilities. There is no real space for life cycle approach, and really we have to keep reminding a lot of member states about the UNEA resolution, which clearly said that you have to address plastic pollution through a comprehensive life cycle approach of plastic, full life cycle approach of plastics. And it seems like even today during the discussion in CG4, some countries reminded that we don't need a scope if we have the UNEA mandate, and that's what should be. So if you say comprehensive life cycle approach, it starts with extraction, ends at disposal, and an agreement should address all the aspects. It shouldn't just be looking at certain aspects. And we have the same countries who are again talking about life cycle approach of plastic waste management based treaty. And so it seems like we are back to square one. There are also new text being added in brackets, and the expectation was, from what I remember from the chair's guidance last night, the expectation was, and this is what the chair had pushed for, to have more language added, which has endorsement through a group of countries. And so more through sort of contact room papers and not individual countries adding suggestion. So this is exactly what he said. Each should identify any issues where there is convergence on anything that could be pushed to plenary and then legal drafting group. Proposals should be proposed by group of members rather than individual for consideration in the relevant contact groups. But that's not what is happening. What is happening is we have the same kind of situation where each country, almost a lot of countries actually, are doing their own submissions on different provisions. And while CRPs are also there from a bunch of countries, it's like, there is a real threat that, few countries have also mentioned that we do not want to be in the same position, like we end up with the same compilation text or a text that's unworkable. Because let me remind everyone that if INC-5 has to be the last one, all the text has to be unbracketed. And right now, countries are again bracketing all the text. And the new additions that they are making is also under brackets. So where does that leave us? And this is just a first reading. And then there will be a second, I think, session where we will go over the same text, and then there will be agreement or disagreement. And then I don't know what happens. So it's still unclear where we are heading. This is the second day. We have 5 days ahead of us. And right now, things are quite unpredictable in terms of whether we would be able to have a meaningful conclusion or not. But so far, everything is not agreed until everything is agreed. That's where we are.
That's right. Okay, for the last question, what's on the agenda that we should be paying attention to right now?
So we have some good events. We have some terrible events. There is a Just Transition event that is led by Just Transition Alliance that came together and developed between INC-1 and 2. And that has frontline and fence-line communities, indigenous peoples, and waste picker groups speaking. We also have our very own Froilan Grate, who is the regional coordinator of GAIA Asia Pacific, speaking at that event. But we also have another just transition event that we found out is happening, which is mostly white people, which has Coca-Cola as a sponsor, that does not have any affected marginalized communities involved at all. So we don't know what kind of just transition they would be talking about. And there was also an engagement between civil society and EU this afternoon. EU, like we know, has a strong progressive position on many of the elements of the treaty. However, they fear if they are too vocal in resisting the poor, the non-ambitious countries, then they will be seen as anti-civil society. But we are very clear as civil society, and I want to remind our viewers, our members who might be listening in, that no treaty is better than a bad treaty. So we should be fighting the bad language and trying to prevent it, instead of agreeing to something that we know in the future will not benefit us and will actually harm our communities and our planet even more. One of the good things that I just recall, just to end on a good note, because I'm always perceived as the messenger of bad news, is that some countries pushed. Here's Anna. Anna, you want to wave hi? We are on Asia Pacific Newsroom. So Anna is the director of GAIA Global Plastic Program. She heads the GAIA delegation, just for those who don't know. Anyway, so some countries got biodiversity added to the objective. They suggested, so far we've not had biodiversity added at all. It's human health and environment. So some countries got biodiversity added. Some countries wanted addition of animal health as well, which to me is sounds like a good idea, because biodiversity really protects our land and our resources, which includes fossil fuels, right? But let's see how that goes. Whereas you do have countries who do not want to protect even human health and want a waste management-based treaty alone. No decisions yet. Let's see. We expect another plenary, I believe, tomorrow or on Friday, and then a concluding one on Sunday. That's where we will have the final conclusion. So far, we don't have any conclusive assessment on whether this is leading to a finish line or not. Back to you, Sonia.
Thank you so much, Arpita, for bringing us today's updates. To everyone watching, keep following Zero Waste Asia on Instagram and YouTube, and GAIA Asia Pacific on Facebook and LinkedIn for real-time updates and highlights. We'll see you again tomorrow for more from the heart of the negotiations. Good evening.